Good evening and welcome back to Capitol Tonight, a statewide look at politics. I'm Tim Boyum. The Senate will get most of the attention this week with a budget vote, but the House has made some noise as well with the magistrate veto override and gun bill. Earlier today, I had the chance to sit down with House Speaker Tim Moore to talk about these issues and more. We start with his thoughts on the Senate budget plan.
Some key differences, of course, have to do with the pay increases that we have allocated in the House budget. We feel strongly about that. We really want to reward our state employees. Also, the funding priorities we've had with education, with roads, economic development, we want to see that maintained. And at the end of the day, I think the Senate and House will come together on a very good compromise.
At the beginning of the session, most House Republicans I talked to were not interested in reducing income taxes any further. They wanted to see what could happen. I sense a little bit of shift in that, and we obviously saw what the Senate did. I mean, are cutting income taxes now on the table with House members?
You know, if we can make some income tax cuts that make sense, that we can tie to further economic growth, then certainly by all means it's worth looking at. But this is one of those items that will simply be on the table for negotiation. Both the House and the Senate Republicans have steadfastly, since we took the majority, pushed tax relief. If you look at the amount of tax relief that we've pushed these last 4 years, it really is unprecedented. We've lowered just about every tax you can think of, everything from the sales tax all the way down to income taxes. The rationale, of course, being that the less money coming into government, the more that's in the private sector to be spent there. So I think you will see a continued push toward making sure that we are taxing at an appropriate level, and no more than that.
The Senate put Medicaid reform in their budget. It's a pretty substantial change. Obviously, there's been substantial differences between the two chambers. I mean, is it really possible to get this done as a budget at the same time?
Well, we need to tackle Medicaid reform. This has been an issue we've been dealing with for several years. We have a House version of that bill that's being considered this week that will probably be on the floor next week for a vote. That has a slightly different path to get to Medicaid reform. There are several things where we agree. We all agree on some form of capitation. We all agree in looking to, well, the House agrees with a provider-led network, and I think the Senate is coming in toward that direction some. The other issue is what role will managed care organizations play. I think all sides recognize they'll have some involvement in this. The question is to what extent. But that's another complicated issue, and that's why we're having to deal with these issues, because if they were easy fixes, someone else would have done them many years ago. The state budget, when you're talking about spending $21 billion, that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work. The thing that folks start talking about, particularly this time of year, is when are we going home? When is the legislature adjourning? And my philosophy is that we adjourn and we go home when the work's done. I would like for that to be in July, but if it happens to be in August or later than that, so be it. When we adjourn and when we go home is when we finish the people's work.
July 1st seems difficult at this point, right?
I believe we'll need a continuing resolution. There's just too much to negotiate. And I think we owe it to the people of North Carolina when the House and the Senate have two such diametrically different positions in a budget. It would be foolhardy to think that we could probably resolve that by July 1st. Now, I'm ready and glad to be proven wrong on that, but just being very pragmatic is, I think it'll take a few weeks to get that done, and here we are already in the second week of June. That's going to be, to think we can have this all done in 2 weeks. We'll probably adopt a continuing resolution that gets us through for a couple of months.
The governor is adamantly against the sales tax redistribution plan, pushing more sales tax money to the rural areas. I mean, you're from a rural area as well. The governor seems to think he has support in here to make sure that doesn't happen. What's your take on that issue?
I think it's an issue that needs careful study and careful review. The opinions on this issue are diverse among the caucus. If folks simply vote their district and say what's good for their district, then you could probably do a count at that point and determine it. But I think most members try to take more of a whole state approach, as well as looking what happens in their particular districts. For example, in my district, if we made this change, I'm in a small rural county, it would result in more money to my district. But I want to make sure that anything that we do, that it doesn't have any unintended consequences, that we don't penalize the urban areas and cause problems there. Additionally, within counties, you have smaller governmental units that are tied in with this as well. And so those smaller governmental units, whether it's a fire district or a sewer district or whatever else, they can get swept up in this too. And so the question is, what happens with the money that's supposed to go to those districts there? So that still needs some work. I guess the bottom line answer is it's still work in progress.
Is it possible to get that done in the budget then in a few weeks or even a month and a half? You mentioned the word study.
I mean, I think it's possible, but it's going to be a process that it's going to have to follow a process. It's going to require substantial involvement from the Finance Committee on the House side and also from our conferees. And at the end of the day, it's all about counting votes to see where the votes are. There may not be the votes to pass it. There may be, but we haven't fleshed that out. I would imagine that as far as the redistribution plan, that the Senate may even make some changes to what it's talking about.
Well, you guys took a lot of heat even from conservatives about your budget. If it's just more along the lines of what Democrats would do. What are you telling those folks?
We believe it is a very fiscally responsible budget. It funds key priorities. It keeps taxes low. And it does so we're living within our budget. We didn't have to look at raising any taxes to do anything. Where we did do some expanded funding was on areas, Tim, that we've had to neglect for years. I'll give you an example, the Justice and Public Safety budget. We've got a very antiquated computer system that the courts use. If a person goes to the courthouse to file something, they're going to walk in carrying a smartphone that's more advanced than the desktop computers that they're looking at sitting on the clerk's offices in there. They have the old like DOS-based system. I can't even operate them. That's one example. We funded pay raises for new teachers just as we promised we would. We funded pay increases for state employees and teachers. You know, we did pay increases last year. We weren't able to do as much as we wanted to, and we found some extra money, and we wanted to be able to do that this year for those folks. So we funded priorities. We didn't just go on a shopping spree and try to find ways to spend money. We wanted to really fund key priorities.
You believe it's a conservative budget?
It absolutely is a conservative budget. It's a practical budget. We had, I believe, 94 votes for the House budget. That is a true bipartisan bill or a vote. The folks who were opposed to it were some who were. I've had it portrayed that those who were on the far right and the far left. There were about an equal number of Democrats as Republicans who voted against the budget. So. I think it's a very balanced budget. I would call it conservative, but I think it's a pragmatic budget, which is why you saw most of the moderate Democrats vote for the budget as well.
Where are we in the governor's bonds? It seems like the Senate doesn't want one for transportation. They feel like they can do it otherwise. Where is the House Republican caucus on these bonds?
Well, we certainly support the governor in trying to bring forth some bonds. We think it's a very forward-looking plan, and so we're going to enact, or we're going to take up some kind of bond proposal. It won't be exactly like what the governor has discussed, but we share a lot of the same vision and same concerns the governor has about our infrastructure funding. As you know, there were two bonds being discussed. There was the capital bond for new construction there. We're looking at that. We're looking very heavily at an education-based bond of loan capital. And then as far as the road bonds, we're looking more at trying to do what's called Garvey bonds that the DOT can do. To do that, we're going to have to open up some additional streams of revenue to DOT to be able to do that for transportation. But we think that may be a more long-term and more sustainable approach to do it. But again, we share the same vision of the governor on trying to bring forth some bonds. He's got some initiatives of wanting to get some construction going, and we share that opinion here. He
wants them in November, but we're getting close to the point where that's not even possible, right?
It's going to be difficult to have the bonds on the ballot for this particular November. You would have to wage a very effective campaign to encourage folks to vote for the bonds. So I don't know that that's going to be possible. And I don't know that we're going to have any bonds enacted by the end of June as far as a bill. So you make a valid point. The longer we wait, the more likely that we have to look at doing something next year as far as the vote of the people, whether it's in the spring or whether it's in the fall.
All right, we got to take one last break. When we return, we'll come back much more with House Speaker Tim Moore on a number of subjects. Stay with us.